Subscribe to Atten Recounts now, because what you're about to hear is one of those rare wartime breakthroughs that quietly saved thousands of lives, then slipped out of public memory almost entirely. You need to hit that subscribe button right now, because what we are uncovering today is a piece of survival knowledge that was deliberately pushed aside by the convenience of modern pharmaceuticals. We are talking about a battlefield innovation that saved thousands of limbs from the sore and pulled soldiers back from the brink of septic death when absolutely nothing else could. In the mud-soaked trenches and field hospitals of the early 20th century, the greatest killer wasn't the bullet itself, but the microscopic army that followed it. Gangrene and sepsis moved faster than surgeons could cut, turning minor shrapnel injuries into fatal systemic infections within hours. Before the mass production of penicillin changed the landscape of medicine in the latter half of the war, combat medics and surgeons relied on a mechanical and chemical hybrid solution that effectively plumbed a wound to sterilize it from the inside out. This is the lost art of the Karel-Dakin method, a system so effective that it serves as the ultimate backup plan for when the antibiotics run dry. What most people think they know about World War II medicine is incomplete. They remember penicillin, morphine syrettes, and battlefield triage. What they do not remember is the innovation that allowed medics to close horrific wounds faster, prevent infection before antibiotics even reach the front, and return soldiers to duty or evacuation in record time. That innovation was negative pressure wound therapy, improvised decades before modern machines made it fashionable. Why, you might wonder, did battlefield medicine demand something radically different? Well, by 1942, Allied medics were facing a truly grim reality. High-velocity shrapnel, explosive fragmentation, and these deep, contaminated wounds were just overwhelming field hospitals. You see, traditional wound care involved cleaning, packing, and then, well, waiting. But waiting meant infection. Infection meant sepsis. And sepsis, more often than not, meant death or amputation. Antibiotics were honestly scarce, unevenly distributed, and, to make matters worse, not always effective against the filthy, stubborn infections so common in trench and jungle environments. Military surgeons, desperate for answers, needed a way to make wounds close faster, drain continuously, and stay clean without this constant painful reopening. The solution, quite remarkably, emerged not from a laboratory, but straight out of necessity. Surgeons began experimenting with controlled suction, applied directly to wounds, using rubber tubing, glass bottles, and manual pumps. The results were immediate and undeniable. How negative pressure wound therapy worked in wartime conditions. The concept was deceptively simple, really. A wound was thoroughly cleaned and surgically debrided, removing dead tissue. Instead of loosely packing it and covering it with gauze, surgeons sealed the wound with an airtight dressing connected to tubing. That tubing led to a suction source, often a hand-operated pump or gravity-assisted vacuum bottle. The negative pressure continuously pulled fluids, blood, and infectious material out of the wound. This did three critical things at once. It reduced bacterial load, increased blood flow to the tissue edges, and, it mechanically stimulated faster tissue regeneration. Soldiers who would have taken weeks to stabilize showed visible improvement in just a matter of days. Surgeons documented faster granulation tissue formation, reduced swelling, and, quite remarkably, dramatically lower rates of gangrene. In some cases, wounds that were considered unsalvageable were actually preserved, and, amputation was avoided entirely. Why did this innovation seem to heal wounds instantly? Well, the phrase instantly isn't really hyperbole when you put it in a battlefield context. Compared to conventional treatment, wounds stabilize shockingly fast. Drainage that would normally need repeated manual intervention happened continuously, almost like clockwork, and, remarkably, inflammation dropped within just a few hours. Pain levels decreased because, pressure and fluid buildup were relieved. For medics under fire, this meant fewer dressing changes, less exposure time, and, fewer complications during evacuation. For surgeons, it meant cleaner surgical fields, and, honestly, more predictable outcomes. For soldiers, it meant survival. Why this breakthrough was largely forgotten after the war. After World War II, medicine shifted toward pharmaceuticals and centralized hospital care. Antibiotics became widely available and surgical techniques advanced rapidly. As a result, the underlying principle was not abandoned, but it was quietly absorbed and forgotten until the late 20th century, when modern negative pressure wound therapy devices were reintroduced as a new invention. In reality, modern wound vacs are refined descendants of what World War II surgeons were already doing with rubber tubing and, a fair bit of ingenuity. How this knowledge still applies today in practical terms. For survivalists, medics, or remote area responders, the lesson is profound. Wound healing is not just about drugs. It is about drainage, pressure control, and blood flow. In austere conditions, controlled suction can dramatically improve outcomes when antibiotics are limited or unavailable. A practical application today might involve a deep laceration or puncture wound in a remote environment. After proper cleaning and debridement, maintaining gentle negative pressure using improvised tools such as tubing and a manual suction device can help prevent fluid accumulation and infection. Even without creating a perfect seal, encouraging continuous drainage mirrors the wartime principle that saved lives. Another application is understanding why modern wound vacs work so well. If you are trained in emergency medicine or surgical assistance, knowing the historical reasoning behind these devices makes you better at using them intelligently rather than mechanically. What World War II surgeons understood that we still need to remember. Those surgeons understood that wounds are dynamic systems. Infection thrives in stagnant environments. Healing accelerates when blood flow is encouraged and waste is removed. They were not waiting for miracles. They engineered solutions under pressure, literally and figuratively. They also understood something modern medicine sometimes forgets. Simplicity matters. A solution that works in mud, rain and chaos is often more robust than one that only works in perfect conditions. Why this belongs in serious historical discussion. This is not a trivia fact. It reshapes how we understand wartime survival. Battles are not won solely by weapons, but by logistics, medicine, and, the ability to return wounded men to the line, or at least keep them alive. Negative pressure wound therapy quietly did that work, day after day, far from headlines. If you care about real history, the kind that changes outcomes rather than decorating textbooks, this is the kind of innovation worth studying and remembering. If this deep dive added something new to your understanding of World War II and survival medicine, subscribe to Atten Recounts. Share this with fellow historians and survivalists and help keep these forgotten innovations alive.